President Trump said that he wants the House to vote on its version of the tax reform bill by Thanksgiving so it can still pass the Senate and be reconciled in time to be signed into law by Christmas. Al Drago for The New York Times, Washington. House Republicans rushed on Tuesday to finalize details of a tax bill that they are set to release on Wednesday, courting support from critical interest groups and swing-vote lawmakers, while keeping frustrated lobbyists largely in the dark. A few key details began to trickle out from what has been a closed-door process of debating and deciding how to fill in the blank spaces in the framework tax plan that President Trump and Republican leaders released in September. House Speaker Paul D. Ryan, Republican of Wisconsin, told conservative groups on Tuesday afternoon that the draft bill would cut the top corporate tax rate to 20% immediately, and not phase it in over a period of years, as had been discussed, according to a meeting attendee. Mr. Ryan also said that the plan would include a higher rate for the wealthiest earners, which would be above the 35% that Republicans have identified as their top tax rate in the framework released in September. Mr. Ryan did not indicate whether the wealthiest would continue to pay the current top rate of 39.6% or if it would be higher or lower. Attendees were also told by Mr. Ryan that Republicans would phase in repeal of the estate tax over several years. That could cause problems in the Senate, where Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, has said she won't vote for a bill that repeals the estate tax. The House bill will include a worldwide minimum tax on multinational corporations' profits, two sources with knowledge of the drafting said, in an effort to prevent companies from shifting money abroad as the United States transitions to a so-called territorial tax system, which would only subject income earned domestically to the American corporate tax rate. The tax would be on all global income, and not on a country-by-country basis, as some companies had feared. Republican leaders also confirmed they will maintain a federal tax deduction for at least some state and local property taxes paid, while eliminating comparable deductions for income and sales taxes. Other issues remained in flux, or unknown outside of a select group of lawmakers and congressional staff. Those include whether the top income tax rate will rise or fall for the wealthiest, the size of an expanded child tax credit, whether to phase in or sunset some rate cuts, and the specifics of how the plan might affect tax-free retirement savings. Mr. Trump invited nearly 24 leaders of major business groups, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Petroleum Institute and the American Farm Bureau Federation, to the White House on Tuesday morning to discuss the bill. In the afternoon, Mr. Ryan had met with Mr. Trump and then with more than a dozen conservative groups on the tax bill, including the Heritage Foundation and Americans for Prosperity. Each of those groups, and in many cases, individual companies, were being for how lawmakers change tax breaks large and small in their overhaul of the tax code. Business leaders, in particular, are ready to applaud or attack the bill depending on how those changes affect their bottom lines. We're trying to see, and evaluate with a calculator at the end of the day, are the incentives going to be right to help the economy to grow, said David Stevens, the president of the Mortgage Bankers Association, whose industry has much at stake in the rewrite of the tax code. A Halloween-themed news release from Mr. Ryan's office on Tuesday suggested that Republicans are prepared for many business groups to oppose the bill when it is released. The special interest schools will do anything to protect all the little tricks and treats, the release said. They will haunt the hallways and demonize our plan. They will conjure up new scare tactics and spread wicked tales. Party leaders are already struggling to kill off some tax breaks they had targeted for elimination. Republicans had proposed wiping out the entire deduction for state and local taxes, which is particularly valuable to high-tax states like New York, New Jersey and California. After running into resistance from lawmakers, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady of Texas said over the weekend that the coming tax bill would include an itemized property tax deduction to help taxpayers with local tax burdens. In an interview Tuesday with the radio host Hugh Hewitt, Mr. Brady said the tax bill would not include a deduction for state or local income taxes. Our lawmakers in those high-tax states really believe their families are being punished the most by property taxes, Mr. Brady said, adding that those taxes are not based on your ability to pay, they're just painful. Mr. Brady also signaled the deduction for property taxes could be limited. Asked if there would be no cap on that deduction, Mr. Brady responded, "To be determined." Representative Tom Reed, Republican of New York, and a member of the Ways and Means Committee, said on Tuesday it was clear that the original plan to eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes was not going to occur. "I think that shows a demonstration by our leadership and by the powers to be that we recognize that this issue needs to be resolved," Mr. Reed told reporters. He said that retaining a deduction for property taxes was gaining traction as we get to the finish line here. "We have to provide relief to the people that we represent, because this is real policy that they're suffering under, even though it's imposed by our governors with a high tax mentality," Mr. Reed said. He added, "At the end of the day, I think a property tax deduction on the property taxes that our local taxpayers pay is where we end up." It did not appear on Tuesday that the compromise was sufficient to win over all the blue State House Republicans who had raised concerns. Democrats criticized the compromise. Go figure that high property tax states like Texas, Chairman Brady's state, would be better off under the proposal. Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York and minority leader, said, "Picking winners and losers like this doesn't solve the problem. The new state and local compromise is still a nearly $1 trillion tax hike on the middle class to pay for tax giveaways to big corporations and the very wealthy." Mr. Trump pushed back on Democratic criticism in his meeting with business leaders. "The Democrats will say our tax bill is for the rich, but they know it's not," he said. He added the Democrats want to raise taxes and really create obstruction, and the Republicans want to lower taxes, and we want to get rid of regulations. He said that he wants the House to vote on its version of the bill by Thanksgiving so it can still pass the Senate and be reconciled in time to be signed into law by Christmas. Asked by a reporter about phasing in the corporate tax rate reductions, he said that was not his plan. Mr. Trump was joined in the meeting by his Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, who on Monday stressed to reporters that the administration believes cutting corporate taxes will raise incomes for the middle class. Mr. Mnuchin's remarks came at the conclusion of a trip to Saudi Arabia, Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar to focus on efforts to combat terrorist financing in the region. Despite being far away from Washington, the tax plan was never far from mind. Several foreign officials asked Mr. Mnuchin about the status of the legislation, and the secretary said he was in constant contact with congressional leaders. "I've been on the phone multiple times a day, sometimes in the middle of the night," said Mr. Mnuchin, who has decided against traveling with Mr. Trump on his upcoming Asia trip to focus on taxes. "We're almost there," Mr. Brady told reporters on Tuesday afternoon that a bill draft would be released Wednesday, but cautioned that its contents could change before his committee meets next week to amend it. Peter Baker contributed reporting.